Comprehensive Guide to Baseball Statistics.
Hey, this is the first video in a 5-part comprehensive guide to baseball statistics. If you're a baseball fan or even an outside observer of the game of baseball, you know that baseball is fundamentally connected to its statistics and record keeping, much more so than other sports. Now, you can definitely enjoy a baseball game without knowing a thing about stats, but becoming familiar with baseball statistics will absolutely give you a deeper appreciation for the game and will give you a language that you can use to communicate with other baseball fans. Baseball statistics can be as simple as counting the number of times something happens, for example, a home run, or they can be complex equations that take into account factors such as ballpark coefficients. This series will cover the full range. This first video begins with a bit of history. If you'd like to skip to the stats, the timestamp is displayed on the screen now. Baseball statistics as we know them are usually traced back to Henry Chadwick, a 19th century New York City sports writer and baseball advocate who was the inventor of the box score and the first person to keep track of things such as home runs, strikeouts, and fielding errors. Chadwick was instrumental in the development of basic statistics that we use to this day, including batting average and ERA. Other things credited to Chadwick include the practice of separating earned runs from unearned runs, the practice of not including walks in any batting or pitching statistics, the abbreviation K for a strikeout, and the 1 through 9 numbering system used to identify the individual fielding positions in box scores and scorecards. Chadwick's ideas dominated baseball stats and record keeping through the 20th century and even into the 21st century. The box score that he developed is still more or less used in newspapers today, and batting average and ERA are still the default statistics you should assume anytime a decimal number is shown next to a player's name. But like all things, baseball stats eventually evolved. Baseball statistics began modernizing in the second half of the 20th century as teams, historians, sports writers, and fans began developing more precise and descriptive stats and metrics that went beyond the limitations of the traditional box score. Most of the people who are responsible for lasting reforms in baseball statistics and record keeping have been members of the Society for American Baseball Research, or SABR, which was founded in 1971. And statistics that go beyond the box score are frequently referred to as sabermetrics, even if they were not developed by members of that organization. Common sabermetric stats include on-base percentage, runs allowed per 9, slugging percentage, BABIP, WOBA, and the various ballpark and era-adjusted plus stats. We will get into most of these in the second video of this series. In 2015, a new layer of record keeping and statistics was added when Major League Baseball introduced its Statcast system, which is a tool for precisely measuring the spin rate, velocity, and trajectory of baseballs as they are thrown and struck. Statcast has proven to be valuable not just for its ability to track granular pitch and batted ball data, but also for the new paradigm of expected stats that becomes possible when you have that level of information available to you. We will be getting to most of these in the fourth video of this series. Today, in 2022, there is a breathtakingly wide range of statistics and analytics and metrics that are regularly used by baseball media, players, front offices, and fans. But it took decades for these reforms and modernizations to make their way into the baseball mainstream. For example, today it is commonly accepted that a batter's ability to get on base via drawing walks is almost as valuable as their ability to get on base via the hit. But even as recently as 2002, this was such a fringe idea in baseball front offices that they made a movie about it, starring Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill.
Gets on base a lot, Rocco. Do I care if it's a walk or a hit? Pete?
You do not.
All right. With the history out of the way, let's move on to the stats. This video covers counting statistics. Counting stats are the most basic type of baseball statistic. At its core, a counting stat is just a record of the number of times an event occurs for a team or player. For example, a strikeout or a home run. The ways in which counting stats are used are pretty intuitive. You can use them to compare players or teams over any length of time. For example, if you wanted to know which team had the most strikeouts in an individual game, or which players scored the most home runs in the month of June, or if you were comparing a few pitchers and you wanted to see which one of them walked the most batters throughout their career, you would just look at the tally of the number of times those things happened. Most counting stats are simple and can be tallied by anyone. However, there are certain stats that are the responsibility of the official scorer. The official scorer is a person who makes certain judgment calls that affect who gets credited with a statistic in certain situations. These include errors and earned runs. Counting stats might seem simple, and they are, but they're the building blocks of the rate stats and the more advanced stats that we're going to be talking about throughout this series. And if you really want to understand baseball record keeping and statistics, it's important to know the nuance and the fine print for a lot of these counting statistics. We will first be looking at counting stats for pitchers and defenses, and then for batters and offenses. One of the most basic records that is kept is which pitchers appeared in which games. The stats that keep track of this are pretty self-explanatory. Games played is tallied each time a player appears in a game. Games started is tallied each time a pitcher threw the first pitch of the game for their team. Games finished is tallied each time a pitcher threw the final pitch of the game for their team. And then a complete game is when the pitcher is the only pitcher for their team in a 9-inning game. So the pitcher that both starts and finishes the game. Similarly, the number of innings pitched is tallied for each pitcher, and this is recorded as a decimal number, where the number on the left of the decimal point represents the number of full innings pitched, and the number on the right of the decimal point represents the number of additional outs that the pitcher has pitched for. Strikeouts, walks, and hit by pitches are also tallied for pitchers, and this should all be pretty self-explanatory. A pitcher is credited with a strikeout when a batter is put out after a third strike. A pitcher is charged with a walk when a batter is awarded first base after the fourth thrown ball. And a pitcher is charged with a hit by pitch when the batter is awarded first base after being struck by a thrown ball. The abbreviations can be a little bit confusing at first because strikeout doesn't start with K and walk does not start with B. A base on ball is a synonym for a walk, and the letter W is reserved for a different stat that we'll get to in a bit. So that's why walk is abbreviated BB. And similarly with strikeout, back in the earliest days of baseball record keeping, sacrifices were abbreviated S. So when they started keeping track of strikeouts, they used the letter K because of the letter K in the word strikeout or strike or struck. Strikeouts are frequently displayed more specifically with a forwards letter K for a strikeout swinging and a backwards letter K for a strikeout looking. An intentional walk is when the fielding team chooses to walk a batter on purpose. These count as walks both for the pitcher and the batter for statistical purposes. Now let's take a look at hits and how they are charged to pitchers and defense. A hit is charged to both the pitcher and the defense when a batter strikes the ball and reaches base. There are two exceptions to this, the error and the fielder's choice. An error is charged to a defensive player when a batter reaches base or a runner advances due to the fielder misplaying a ball that, in the eyes of the official scorer, should have resulted in an out. And or when a misplayed ball allows a plate appearance to continue after the batter should have been put out. And a fielder's choice is when the ball is put in play and the fielder could put the runner out at first base, but instead chooses to put out another base runner. In each of these cases, a hit is not charged to the pitcher nor the defense. Whenever a hit does occur, the type of hit is recorded, both for offense and defense. And we'll talk more about this in the next section when we talk about counting stats for batters. Another event that gets tallied as a statistic is when base runners are allowed to advance because the catcher was for some reason unable to handle a pitch delivered by the pitcher. This situation is either a wild pitch if the official scorer determines that it's the pitcher's fault, or it's a passed ball if the official scorer determines that it's the catcher's fault that this happened. Now let's talk about how runs are tallied for pitchers and defenses for statistical purposes. Whenever a player scores a run, the defending team is charged with a run, as is the pitcher who was pitching when that player reached base. However, the pitcher is not charged for an earned run if the runner who scored initially got on base due to an error. This distinction between a run and an earned run is important when determining certain pitching statistics that we'll get to in the next video. Finally, let's talk about wins and losses as pitching statistics. Sorry, let me try that again. Finally, let's talk about wins and losses as Well, I have to go on, so thanks. At the conclusion of each baseball game, one pitcher from the winning team is credited with the win, and one pitcher from the losing team is charged with the loss. This decision is recorded by the official scorer, but there are specific and standard rules they follow. In general, the winning pitcher is the one who is pitching when their team takes the lead for good, and the losing pitcher is the one who is responsible for the run that gives the opposing team a lead that they never relinquish. There are exceptions, A starting pitcher must pitch 5 full innings in order to qualify for the win. A relief pitcher only has to be the last pitcher who pitched before their team took the lead for good in order to qualify for the win. And if the official score deems a reliever's appearance to be ineffective, for example, if they gave up a bunch of runs but got bailed out by their team in the following half inning, then the official scorer will award the win to the most effective reliever, in the opinion of the official scorer. A starting pitcher that is credited with neither the win nor the loss gets a no decision. If this sounds messy to you, it is. A pitcher's win-loss record used to be an important stat to baseball. In fact, throughout most of baseball's history, a pitcher's win-loss record was the primary way that a pitcher was evaluated. However, pitching has changed a great deal since the days where a pitcher would pitch 40 or even 60 complete games a season. And these days, a pitcher's win-loss record is seen as pretty much irrelevant to anyone except the most traditional purists. The reason for this is that a pitcher can only control what a pitcher can control. The pitcher cannot control how the defense performs, and a pitcher certainly cannot control how the offense performs or how their team's bullpen performs. So, for example, if a pitcher is able to carry a shutout deep into the game, but their team does not score any runs and their bullpen gives up the losing run, people these days would consider that a very good performance from a pitcher. And the fact that the team did not win does not reflect in any way on how the pitcher performed. And finally, a save is awarded to the relief pitcher who finishes a game for the winning team under certain circumstances. The most common scenario that will see a pitcher earn a save is when they enter the game in the 9th inning while their team is up by 3 runs or fewer, and they preserve that lead for the win. Pitchers that are used in these types of save situations are called closers. A pitcher who has the opportunity to save the game but loses the game is given a blown save, which is abbreviated BS. Now onto counting stats for batting and the offense. A plate appearance is recorded anytime a batter comes up to take their turn at the plate, and a result is recorded between batter and pitcher. Pretty much every time a player comes up to bat is a plate appearance. There are only a few exceptions where a player might come to the plate as a batter and not have it recorded as their own plate appearance. These exceptions include situations where a game ends with an out on the base paths, or if a batter is ejected or leaves the game for another reason during a plate appearance. An at-bat is a plate appearance that results in a hit, error, fielder's choice, or an out. It does not include walks, hit by pitches, or sacrifice flies. The terms plate appearance and at-bat are sometimes used interchangeably, especially in casual conversation, but this distinction between an at-bat and a plate appearance becomes important when determining certain stats that focus specifically on a player's batting ability, for example, batting average or slugging percentage. A hit is recorded anytime a batter strikes the ball and reaches base. The exception to this are instances where the batter reached base via an error or a fielder's choice. Hitting into a fielder's choice has the same statistical impact as an out for a batter. And if a batter reaches base on an error, it's treated like it didn't happen for statistical purposes. Each time a batter gets a hit, the type of hit is recorded. So it might be a single if the batter reached first base, or it might be an extra base hit. And these include doubles, where the batter made it as far as second base, triples, where the batter made it as far as third base, or home runs, where the batter made it all the way around the bases. If a batter gets a hit, and then a fielding or throwing error results in the batter being able to get to more bases than they initially were able to get to based on their hit, the batter is only credited with the initial hit. So for example, if the batter hits a single, but then a fielding or throwing error allows the batter to reach second base, that is not a double, that's still just a single. Similarly, if the batter gets a hit, but is thrown out trying to extend to the next base. For example, if they hit a single, but then they are thrown out at second base trying to extend as a double, the batter gets credit for as many bases as they reached safely. Walks, strikeouts, and hit by pitches are also recorded for batters. And if you'd like a more in-depth explanation of what these are, check out the previous section of this video. A player is credited with an RBI anytime they have a plate appearance that results in a run being scored. This includes home runs, and despite the fact that RBI stands for runs batted in, walks, hit by pitches, and sacrifices also count. A base runner is credited with a stolen base when they advance to a base they are not entitled to, and the official scorer determines that the runner should be credited with the advance. So it's not a stolen base, for example, if a base runner is able to go from first to second base because of a wild pitch. A base runner is caught stealing, CS, if they attempt to steal a base and are put out. A sacrifice is when a player hits into an out in order to advance one or more runners. There are two types of sacrifices. There's the sacrifice bunt, which is where a player bunts into an out in order to advance runners. Sacrifice bunts are abbreviated SH because they're also called sacrifice hits, and SB is already taken by stolen bases. A sacrifice fly is when a batter hits into a fly out, and this allows the runner on third base to score. Sacrifice bunts and sacrifice flies are outs on the field, but they are not included as an out when calculating batting statistics such as on-base percentage and batting average. A ground into double play is when a batter hits a ground ball that leads to multiple outs on the bases. The final counting stat to talk about is left on base, which is the number of runners left on base at the end of an inning. Like every counting stat here, left on base is tallied for individual players as well as at the team level. All right, so those are the primary counting stats of baseball. As I said before, counting stats are simple and intuitive to use, and most of this was probably a review even for the more casual baseball fans. But these counting stats are also the building blocks of the rate stats and the more advanced stats that we're going to be getting to in subsequent videos. And it's important to know the nuance and the subtle differences between some of these counting stats. For example, the difference between an at-bat and a plate appearance. As always, if I've made an error or you think I've left something out, please leave a comment. I'll be addressing any omissions or errors as part of the final video in this series. The next video in this series covers rate stats, and this includes basic rate stats like batting average, as well as more advanced stats like BABIP and WOBA and plus stats. If you're watching this in the future, the video should be on your screen right now to click. If you're watching this in real time, you'll just have to wait a week or so. If you'd like to help me grow this channel, please click the thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.